Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to install Mac OS X on a Windows computer using the technique called a Hackintosh. So there are a couple of downloads you need to do for this and that sort of thing. I'm actually going to be guiding you through how to install a RAID 0 array, which doesn't work by default. This is a software RAID rather than anything in your BIOS, which is supported by Mac, and it requires you to install your operating system onto a second hard drive before transferring it back across onto your RAID array. In this video I'm using 3 SSDs in RAID 0. As far as I know, this only works for RAID 0 rather than RAID 1 or anything else. But you might want to check this. This is a guide from Macbreaker.com, so I'll leave a link in the description down below, but I thought I might as well make a video version for anyone out there who wants to know how to do this. It's quite handy as by default the Mac won't boot if you have it in RAID 0, which is a pain, and I found that out the hard way, so I'm going to be showing you how to do this. So first of all, we need to install Mac OS X onto our secondary hard drive. A quick note, OS X won't install on a partition greater than 1 TB, so I'm using a 2 TB drive and I've got it partitioned into a 500 GB section and a 1.5 TB section. I'll install it on the 500 GB section. So let's go ahead and boot it up. Now you're going to need a Unibeast drive for this, which is quite simple to make. I've already made mine, so I can't really make a video on it, but it's quite simple. You need to get someone who has a Mac, or if you have a Mac yourself, then you can do that. And you need to download OS X 0.8.4, I think is the most recent version. Download the installer from the App Store, and then download a program from TonyMacX86.com called Unibeast. Run Unibeast with the hard drive plugged in, and it'll make the hard drive bootable from OS X. And then you just plug that into your machine and go into the bootloader or boot menu and select that. So in my instance it's W My Passport. Now I've actually already installed it on the 500 GB section, but what you do is you just select Unibeast, hit enter and let that run, whereas I've already installed it here onto boot. Because of the hardware I am using, there are a couple of boot flags I need to use to get mine to work. I'll just go ahead and type those in. And then we can boot into it. Once we've booted into it, this is the 2 TB drive, remember. We then need to make this bootable, so download this program called Multibeast, which will basically install all the drivers to make sure that all your hardware is working fine with OS X. Obviously there's some compatibility issues, you need to make sure that all your hardware does work before you go ahead and buy everything. But the people over on Tony Mac are very helpful with that, so I'd suggest going over there. Again, I'll leave a link down below. So we are now booting into the installation. So I'll just go ahead and install, same as it would be on a normal Mac. So then you can go ahead, select your time zone, and we're going to skip that. And you can start using your Mac. So effectively this does work, but if you were to turn your computer off and turn it back on again, then it wouldn't boot because we haven't got a thing called a bootloader on there, which is a program called Chimera, which is installed in Multibeast. So we're going to need to go onto Safari and start installing some stuff. Okay, so we need to go to TonyMacX86.com. And you're going to need an account for this, but it's a really helpful website, so I'd recommend having an account anyway. Right, go to downloads and just click on that, and then it will ask you to log in. Go ahead and do that. And from this downloads section, you want to select Multibeast Mountain Lion 5.4.3, which is the most recent edition. Just click on that and then click download. This will take several minutes, but Once it has downloaded, you're going to want to go on to TonyMacX86.com and check out any other builds which use similar parts to yours, as that will decide which boxes you need to tick. It's all very specific to your motherboard, graphics card, CPU. That's probably about it. Maybe the hard drive you're using, whether you have trim enable and that sort of thing. But they're very helpful, and I'm sure someone will be there to help you know which ones to use. But obviously these are the ones which I need for this motherboard CPU combination. So if you do have this combination, which is a Gigabyte GAX79 UD3 and a 3930K and a GTX 780, then fine, follow this. If not, then you're going to need to look up your own ones. There are a couple of suggested builds on TonyMacX86.com, I think it's in Buyer's Guide, which require very little in terms of downloading DSDTs and that sort of thing, which is very handy if this is your first one, but I've done a couple, so it's a little more complicated. In general, 3930K, 3970X and the 3820 don't work particularly well on Hackintosh. They're a lot more tricky to get running because they're not used in actual Macs, whereas Haswell and that sort of thing, well, not Haswell yet, but it will be. So they're a lot easier to get to run. Yeah, I'll see you in a second once this is finished downloading. Okay, now that that's downloaded, we can go ahead and open it up, and it'll look something like this. So you just click continue through here, agree, and you're going to want to select Easy Beast. Well, for this combination, go into drivers, audio, Realtek without DSDT, 898, and network, Intel, system, bootloaders, Chimera v2.1.2, and come into customization, boot options, graphics enable equals no, system definitions, Mac Pro 3.1, and that is what we need. You want to select USB 3 universal within miscellaneous as well, and hit continue, and let that install. Installation successful. Okay, so for this combination there are a couple of extra text files that you actually need to install. Obviously it depends on what hardware you're using, so you just copy those onto the desktop, and then you need to download another one from Tony Mac called KextBeast. You just go ahead and download that. Before you do that, you need to go into your system preferences, go into security and privacy, and select anywhere, allow for anywhere, and then close that because it's downloaded from the internet, otherwise it won't work. Okay, click continue, install, let that do its thing, close. And then for this we also need to go into Go Computer, go into where you installed it, so in this case it's boot, go into the extra folder, open org.chameleon.boot.plist, and under kernel flags, where it says darkwake equals 0, after that under a space npci equals 0 times 2000, and save that. Again, if you are not using this exact combination of hardware, then these settings won't work for you. So you want to check that by shutting down the computer and rebooting it. So because I've actually got two 2TB drives in there and they're both identical, I'm actually going to boot through the Unibeast drive because I don't know which drive's which in the boot menu. But obviously if you've just got the one, then that's fine. So I'm just pressing F12 to get into the boot menu from a Gigabyte motherboard. Let's wait for that. And select my passport again. And like before, we should see the three options again. This time, instead of having to type in those boot flags, it should just boot straight into it. because that's what all that stuff we were doing just earlier should have fixed. Basically, if you get this spinny wheel, then you know it's going to work. Quite often it will just freeze on this screen without the spinny wheel, and if that's happened, then you probably need to put in a boot flag for it to boot properly, or boot in safe mode, so you should type in -X when you're booting. So yeah, that's worked, and we should see the desktop. Now, before we can do the RAID, there are some things we need to download. For some reason it'll sometimes do this, you just need to click that one. So we need to go back onto, actually I'll show you the article, macbreaker.com. So the article has the links to the exact things which you need to download in order to do this RAID setup. Let's go ahead and search for RAID 0. It's this one. So you can see we need to have these things, 2 extra hard disks, standalone installer for Chimera, which you download from Tony Mac, unpackage, and carbon copy cloner. So we'll go ahead and open that. Log in again. And it's just Chimera here. And just download that. That's done. And we also need unpackage. Most recent version, and we'll just go ahead and download that. And then finally we also need Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper. Both have free versions. The Carbon Copy Cloner only lasts for 30 days. That's all you need. So you're just going to select download. And this is what we'll use to transfer the operating system from the secondary drive onto the RAID array once we've created that. And then we'll have to manually install Chimera using, whatever it calls itself, terminal or something. Okay, it's downloaded. So we can go ahead and minimize that and search in Spotlight disk utility. Open that, and now we're going to create our RAID array. So we select one of our SSDs, click RAID, call it something, S10 RAID, and the type you want is a striked RAID set, which is RAID 0, and then you just drag across all of the hard drives you want to use and click create. And then that will create a RAID array out of those 3 hard drives. So that is just finishing up. And then we're going to want to come down to here, which is the actual RAID array itself, and come up to get info, and then down to the RAID identifier and just copy that. So if you're using a Windows keyboard, it's Windows sign then C. So you can just double check that it is the correct RAID, because it says OS10 RAID, which is what we just called it. So once you've copied that, we need to do something back in the extra folder where we were before. Again on the chameleon.bootlist thing. So again in the kernel flags section, so after what we just typed earlier, you need to type in rd equals, without a space, UUID space boot. Is that one space or 2? Boot dash UUID equals, and then what it was that you copied earlier, so press Windows V. Let's just check that's worked. You also need to make sure that kernel cache is set to yes. So down here, use kernel cache, yes. If that's not, then just type in that, otherwise it won't work. And save that, close it, And then we're going to go ahead and go into, no, we're not going to terminal yet. We need to clone it, which is what Common Copy Cloner is for. Open, agree, trial. So we're going to select our source, which will be, no thanks, which will be the boot, which is where we just installed it, and the destination is going to be OS 10 RAID. And you want to select delete anything that doesn't exist on the source. This is actually too big, I can't see it. Yeah, my screen's really crap, so I can't see the full thing because the resolution's really low. And okay, clone, yes, okay, continue. And wait for that to clone, it'll probably take about 5-10 minutes. Okay, so earlier we downloaded unpackage and Chimera. So you need to run unpackage, click on details, and then grab Chimera, which we downloaded, and press quit. So we should now have Chimera there. We also need to go to the computer, boot extra, and drag that onto the desktop. So we need to open that, go into user, standalone i386, and all of these need to be copied onto the desktop, not moved. So we need to go copy, minimize that, paste. So once we've got extra and those 4 files on there, we can proceed to install Chimera manually. Okay, so this is the point where we go into terminal. So we're going to need to go into Finder, Applications, Utilities, Terminal, and the first thing you need to type is disk util list. Press enter, and this will give you a list of all the hard drives plugged in. You can look at the ones which are in your RAID array. So in my case, that's these 3. And what you need to look at is, first of all, what disk they are, so disk 0, disk 1, disk 2, and their Apple Boot OS 10 identifier. So in this one, disk 2S3, disk 1S3, disk 0S3. You should remember that because you're going to need to use it later. So then you can scroll down and type in sudo su, which will give you super user. And you type in your password. Password won't appear, but that's fine. And then type in cd desktop. And then, depending on how many hard drives you're using in your RAID array, this will differ. So you want to go fdisk-f space boot 0 space -u space -y space /dev/. And this is where the first disk identifier comes in, which is the disk 0 bit of it. But you need to put in an R before it for this to work. So you put /dev/r, and then you can just go along and copy that line, which is certainly helpful if you're doing a lot of them. And then disk 0, enter conv disk 1 on v disk 2, and then you need to go dd space if equals boot 1h of equals /dev/ and then the partition identifier, which is r disk 0s3. So you just want to copy that section. And then do that again for all of the drives. Command V disk 1 S3, Command V disk 2 S3. And then once that is all done, we move on to the next section. So you type in disk util mount, and then the partition identifier, which is our disk which is disk 1 or disk 0 S3, so mount disk 0 S3. This is going to be a lot of just typing here, so you need to put in cp space boot space / volumes / quote marks, which is in a different place on the Mac keyboard, boot OS X quote mark, enter, and then cp space /r space / extra space / volumes /volumes / quote boot OS 10, and then you need to go disk util unmount disk 0 S3, and then repeat that for all the hard drives that you're using. So for the next one, I'm going to go disk util mount disk 1 S3. Okay, so once you've typed in all of them, you should be done. So you can, do you save it? No, you can just close. Click close, close, start, shut down, and this time instead of selecting the 2 TB drive to boot from, we're going to select one of the 120 gig. Any of them will work just fine, and boot from them. Check that that's working, then we can unplug the Unibeast drive and make sure that it boots fine without it. On this computer, because of the setup with RAID controllers, the way that it's done is it'll automatically boot into Windows because it's a dual boot machine, and then if you want to go into Mac you have to press F12 no matter what, so that's a bit of a pain. We're just restarting now. There will be a whole load of videos showing the building of this computer if you are interested. It's a pretty good machine. I've done some benchmarking on it and it's performed really well. Yeah, I've been really impressed with how it's working, but it's a client build, so unfortunately I don't get to use it for much longer. I think he's picking it up today, so I've got to do this. So again, we'll boot from my passport. So now this time we've got Unibeast, Windows, OS 10 RAID, boot, which was the 2 TB one. They've got OS RAID 3 and OS 10 RAID 2. If we boot from any of the OS 10 RAIDs, then that should be fine. So we select that, then hopefully this should work. Yeah, there we go, we've got the spinning wheel, which means that all is good. The boot time's pretty fast, since it's RAID 0 on SSDs. It's a lot quicker on Windows for some reason. That's because you don't have to go through all the steps at the beginning, but there we go. We now have a working Hackintosh. We can move that lot to the trash. And there we go. That is how you build a Hackintosh. Obviously this wasn't particularly in-depth, it was more focusing on the setting up of RAID, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me, and I might do more guides in the future. So I think that just about wraps it up. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thanks.